Hello, everybody. My name is Lexi Casper, and I'm with the Ottawa Conservation District. I have just a few statements here before we jump into our main event, just a couple housekeeping items. For those of you who may have heard about this workshop from one of our partners, I want to tell you quickly about the Ottawa Conservation District. We are an organization based here in Ottawa County, and our goal is to be your local resource for natural resource conservation. Our organization was founded in 1938 by several local concerned landowners, and today we continue to assist residents with natural resource concerns of all kinds. So our programs assist anyone from residential homeowners to commercial producers and touch on many areas of conservation such as soil health, water quality and quantity, and invasive species management. We do hold an annual native plant sale, so if you are moved by Wes's presentation and want to make sure you get some native plants, our ordering for that does close this coming Monday on May 2nd. And if you would like to know more, you can visit our Facebook page or visit our website at ottawacd.org. I also would like to quickly thank Ottawa County Parks and Recreation. They helped us facilitate this workshop, offering up their beautiful space, and then also offering us the tech so that we could make sure people were able to attend virtually as well. And with that, I would like to introduce Wesley Landon. Mr. Landon is a licensed landscape architect and founding principal of Native Edge LLC. Specializing in native design and placemaking, his passion is creating resilient, innovative spaces which inspire and restore the native environmental fabric of the landscape. Wes's design philosophy is simple: work with nature, not against it. Mimicking the natural environmental processes and native ecology of a site is the first step in unlocking its truest potential and is the foundation upon which all Native Edge's projects are built. His mission is to blur the lines between the built and the natural environment and create resilient, innovative places, which are in harmony with the environmental, social, and economic needs of the area. And with that, I'll turn it over to him.
All right, thanks, Lexi. Thanks everyone for being here tonight. And just right off the bat, I didn't rob a bank. Little hazards of the job, so don't worry about that. Why are my hands blue? No need to worry. So yeah, I'm excited. This is a great turnout. Happy that folks are here to learn about native plants, design, maintenance, and some of the other aspects of the industry and the movement, which is really important and gathering a lot of steam. This is evident by this group here tonight. So just mess it up already. Okay, so yeah, I own Native Edge with my wife Jackie. I'm a licensed landscape architect. My wife Jackie is an aquatic biologist, and those are our two kids. And that, along with some dedicated field staff throughout the year, is the Native Edge team. We offer landscape architecture services, environmental services, a lot of native perennial garden design, and kind of everything in between. If you are interested in native landscapes and you've got a design job, we are likely a good fit for you or can help you along the way with your project. So quickly here, how many of you know who that guy is? Okay, a good amount. If you don't and you're here, you should acquaint yourself, because that's Doug Tallamy. A lot of what you'll see in this presentation in terms of the general information about the why for native landscapes, he's been a big reason for the momentum and the education surrounding this movement. So those are two of his books. His most recent one, Nature's Best Hope, and then Bringing Nature Home. Bringing Nature Home is the classic. You can get it in paperback, and I really highly recommend it. Also, just a quick shout out that this presentation will be made available to you. So no need to, when I'm going to be going through some information kind of quickly. So just soak it up. No need to, take notes feverishly, because you'll have all this by tomorrow, I think. So what are native plants? Okay, so I didn't want to show that who can tell me? I want to make this a little bit interactive. So what are native plants? Anybody just want to venture a guess? I'm nice.
Plants grow naturally in your area.
Yes, yes. So plants that grow naturally in a given area that evolved in an area over millennia, basically. Here in the United States, I mean everywhere, but typically in the United States, native plants are considered species that were here prior to European settlement. And native plants are native to a specific region locally. So, you know, just because North America, something that is native in Michigan is not necessarily native in Florida or even Ohio. It becomes that specific, you know, as you move across the landscape in different areas. So as locally as you can, native plants to your area. So why are native plants important? And in general here, I kind of want to back up again a little bit and just kind of gauge the room. So I know kind of the mix of folks we got in here. In terms of your experience with native plants, you know, 10 being an expert, you know them like the back of your hand, you know why they're important, all the good stuff. 1 being, it sounds interesting, but you really don't know anything. Who would say they're in the 7 to 10 range in this room? Couple. Okay, so then the 4 to 7. Okay, a few more, and then 4 to 1s. This is awesome. Okay, we've got a good mix. I think there's something here for everybody. So this is really the reason that native plants are so important is because native plants, and here we've got the classic example of the milkweed, common milkweed, and the monarch butterfly. So they evolved together over millennia, and monarch butterflies, monarchs specifically need milkweed species, Asclepias, to survive. Just did that on its own. But so of the 2,000 plus plant genera found in North America, monarch caterpillars eat only 1 species, and that's milkweed. So if the milkweed are gone, the monarchs are gone. Full stop. You know, they're gone. And so, what is going on? It must be. Okay. Whoa. Okay. All right. Bear with me. So, I mean, it's kind of on the right timing. It's just, it'll keep me on pace. Okay. So you can't really see that, but it says monarchs have declined 96% since I think the 1970s. So they get a lot of attention. Now you're probably familiar that we need plant milkweed for monarchs. But the thing that we need to drive home is that there are so many other species that have these specialized relationships. So we can't just plant milkweed. We need to plant a whole wide variety of native plants because there are plenty of thousands of other specialized relationships like the monarch and the milkweed that we need to protect. So if you like birds, you should be planting. Oh, sure. If you like birds, you need to be planting native plants because birds feed their chicks, caterpillars, by the bucketload. And you can see here that birds need thousands of caterpillars to raise 1 clutch of chicks. So without those really fat, juicy caterpillars, the birds aren't going to have enough food to eat. And we're already seeing a lot of bird species decline. Oh boy. I don't know, my down button's not working. Okay, so, and, you know, if we only have a certain amount and the birds get really good at hunting, then they'll eat up all the caterpillars. So we need a whole mess of them. I shouldn't just start clicking things. It is. It's really cute. That's one of Doug's pictures. And so I met Doug Tallamy a couple years ago at a Wildflower Association of Michigan conference where he was speaking. And I've also got a flyer back here because the River City Wild Ones out of Grand Rapids is having Doug come talk in June. We'll be there. It's a free event with sponsors. So if you're interested, you should go see him talk. But anyway, Doug is an incredibly nice guy. He's got all these incredible pictures and resources. And he just, after the conference, he said, if anybody wants these presentations, just ask me and I'll send them to you. And true to his word, I said, would you mind? Because I do some of these events, I'll shout you out. And if you're ever interested in just a why plant natives, I've got about a 400-page thing that just shows all the specialized relationships with insects that and their host plants. And he's got just an amazing archive of these. The down button isn't working anymore. It went rogue and then it stopped. Tech support. I mean, should we just exit out?
Yeah. Don't worry about it. It's okay. Let's see here. Sorry, everybody. This is how it always goes. Somehow you've got timings.
You got a burning question.
Yeah. See, you are going to be able to make jokes.
If the climate is changing, what happens to plant life?
So, I mean, that's a great question. That's something I don't think we really had the answers to yet. You know, we're definitely seeing things get a little bit, warmer. So, I mean, if you just want to say, okay, things are generally going to get a little bit warmer overall, then maybe you'll see species that maybe aren't quite as cold hardy start to move a little bit north. But I think those changes are really incremental. No, possibly. I mean, possibly, but I think it's more like it's more like glaciers than the climate's changing, so we gotta adjust how we plant. I really a lot of the guidance that you'll see is plant native plants local to your area. Okay, but some people will say, well, this is something that's local to Michigan. Well, the Western UP is a lot more different to Grand Rapids than Northern Indiana, Ohio. So, it's like, it's as close as you can get to home. And then also, regionally as well. I mean, I try to tell people that, your county is better than just your state is better than just your country. So, and if something is native to, Wisconsin and it's native to Michigan, I mean, that's a heck of a lot better than maybe something native to China or Africa or something. Things like that.
I'm going to have a question.
Go ahead.
So, with landscape design, I live in a city, and I'm just looking at all those worms. I'm thinking about my yard. And in general, have lots in the city. Don't want all those worms because those worms eat everything else too.
Well, actually, it's kind of, you got to think about the monarch caterpillar and the milkweed. So there's a paradigm shift. It comes with us needing to reevaluate and teach ourselves how to plant a landscape. We need to get over a lot of the traditional landscaping practices that we employ. Plants too far apart, 5 inches of mulch annually, needing a manicured lawn in areas that we only enter to mow it. Those are the things that we've got to change. So the new perennial movement is a new movement, new-ish, where it's using plants in a more naturalistic fashion. Now, some of the examples you'll see in here, like this is a Peter adult landscape. He doesn't use all natives, but the principles behind the new perennial movement are things that you can use in your landscape to help install native plants in a naturalistic way that have intention. Mimic nature, plant in layers, allow plants to be close together, focus on harmony, repetition, and allowing your landscape to look natural. So some of the inspiration, Doug again, Roy Diblick, Peter Odulf. Peter Odulf is very famous landscape plantsman. He does huge gardens all over the world. The Lurie Garden in Chicago is where he's standing in front right there. He doesn't really care for natives so much. The Highline in New York use a lot of them just because he was going for a little bit of a natural American prairie aesthetic. But it's the principles behind the planting style that you can refer to. I don't know why these are so blurry, but the no maintenance garden, planting a new perspective. That middle book, it was really what kind of taught me about some of the planting techniques. Garden Revolution, now that book does have a lot of this planting style also with native plants in it as well, it being the focus by Larry Newman. Okay, now design. Have to be scary. Step one, inventory analysis. The beginning of any project is just taking an inventory of what you have, the good, the bad, so that you can make a plan to move forward. What does your site look like? What is there that works? What do you need to take out? What are problems? What are things you have questions about? Just an inventory of your site. The project area. So if you want to take your 20-acre property and do something, well, that's a different approach than if you want to improve the landscape beds around your residence, or you want to put a pollinator garden in somewhere in your local community, at your church, at your library. So determining the size of the area is the next step. These are all pretty simple things just in terms of, okay, what are the facts that we have to work with? Evaluate the existing conditions. So soil type. Some people might not have any clue about soil type. It's not too difficult, really. It doesn't need to be too nuanced. Native plants are pretty flexible. There are some that aren't, but if you have, everybody knows what sand is. Loam is a little bit gritty with a little bit of, more organic material in there. It's darker. And then, clay is that, really hard, tough, slick soil. There are plenty of resources online for you to help determine what soil type you have. But you don't need to know exactly. You don't need to know all the chemical composition of it. Just in general, what's the texture of the soil? Then sun exposure, that's pretty easy. Full sun, part sun, or shade. Or where on the spectrum your landscape falls. Hydrology, so how wet is it? Is it consistently wet? Is it consistently dry? And how well does it drain? So a lot of clay soils will hold water after a storm. Is that something that happens in your landscape? So you need plants that like wet and dry, because when we get into droughtier times in the midsummer, those plants will need to survive when there's no access to water. And then topography. This site has relatively the same sun exposure, probably hydrology, but something on the top of that hill is going to support different plants than something that maybe is down in the valley or the toe of the slope. So what's the topography that's factoring into your project? So once you have those things, and you really just need hydrology, soil, and sun, you can develop your plant palette. There's really great resources online. Prairie Moon Nursery is one of the best, just because they have a really wide list of native plants, really in depth, and you can click on a map and it shows you if it's native to your state and to your county. So it's a really good resource just in general to know what's native to you. And they have options to search on there as well. So you can say I have, part sun, clay soils or wet soils, and what bloom times do I want, things like that. So once you know all your site's inputs, then you can say, okay, here's the palette, here's the plants that will work in my site, and then you can go from there. Okay, beware of nativars. So we recommend straight native species because that's what nature evolved with. That's what the pollinators and the fauna out there will be seeking out to complete their life cycle needs. There are a lot of places, especially big nursery centers and things that they have a lot of native species. Well, they're these types of things. Not always. Some nativars are okay. There are some that we use, especially certain trees and things like that, because their native plants are hard to get at a certain size, especially for tree and shrub stocks and things like that. So there are some that are fine, but generally we say stay clear of them and go to a native plant producer who gets wild caught seed from local genotypes, because here the reason that this is bad is because it looks pretty, but you can't, let's see, the bees and butterflies, they can't gather pollen and nectar. They don't have access to it in there. So it's really not providing any habitat value. Okay. So time to design. You know, I think in general this can be intimidating, but the thing is, I want people to think about one. Okay, everyone wants aesthetics. Okay, aesthetics are important. We want it to look nice. We want people to look upon it as something that looks nice, not just a weed patch. But also feel free to experiment and have fun with it. I mean, and also just throughout your journey, know that you're doing this for wildlife as well. So, you know, they don't care what it looks like. They're really happy that you're planting it. Okay, so I think I've done this talk before in various ways, and I'm trying to keep it as simple as possible. And so the main rule that I focus on is planting layers. And that's something that I think is kind of easy for people to grasp, and that's just should be the driving factor in your design. I'll talk about why. So this is a great image I grabbed from finegardening.com. And this is what we're talking about. We're thinking of layers. You've got the base layer, you know, they call that the functional layer. Really what you want is we want to create, I mean, when you look outside, I mean, okay, woodland is not a great example. But if you look at the prairie out there and it's full of plants, you know, plants want to occupy every square inch of that prairie space, every square inch of the garden space. If you take a hula hoop and you throw it out in the prairie, you'll be able to count hundreds of species within the circle of that hula hoop. If you have mulch or just open space, that just invites weeds over time. So planting and planting thick and having a functional layer, a base layer that fills out and helps to block the sun's energy from getting down to the soil level, at least, you know, when everything is leaked out in midsummer, really helps for weed suppression and allows the plants to come together and creates a design that reflects nature, which wildlife appreciates and has a nice natural aesthetic. So we call this the matrix. That's more what I'm familiar with calling it, and that's what we'll see a lot of people call it in some of the design literature. So matrix plants, they make up the foundation. They're generally kind of fine textured plants, but it's anything that has a reasonably consistent form throughout the year that, like we said, can make that base layer of your planting. Now, it can be a plant that gets 3 feet tall if it has broad leaves that fill out all the way to the ground level, because that's what we're trying to cover, you know, in the garden space. So lots of sedges, lots of grasses. Those are your traditional ones, but there are others as well. So I'll click through a few of these. In a woodland setting, Pennsylvania sedge, you can see that filling out in the shaded garden. Some things are a little blurry, but plantain leaf sedge, a really interesting sedge that I love planting. It's got those chartreuse leaves. Ivory sedge, lots of low profile shaded sedges. Fox sedge, great for wet areas, fills out very nicely, full sun. Palm sedge, another one. This actually will take quite a bit of shade and does well in wet areas as well as dry, so very good landscape plant. Long beak sedge, I mean, these are just some examples of the things you'll be able to find in nurseries that are really, really good. And so the difference between sedges and grasses, generally, I mean, a lot of grasses are warm season. A lot of the little blue stem out there, those are warm season grasses. So they really start greening up when temperatures consistently in the 60s. So think, you know, well into May and June. Sedges start greening up really early in the year. So incorporating these into your landscape can help the spring garden get a little bit of green right away. Then little blue stem, like we just mentioned, a warm season bunch grass, prairie dropseed, very classic for filling out. Side oats grama, and big blue stem. So this is a huge plant, but this is going to fill out. So this is more in your taller prairie garden. If you want a tall grass prairie, this is one that it will fill out like crazy. So you need to make sure you have robust plants in there that can compete with it. Same thing with Indian grass. and then switchgrass. But they're not all that way. So ground covers, and there are a lot of flowering plants that can also occupy the matrix. So foam flower is a good example. Wild geranium in the right setting. Wild geranium, when well sited in kind of a consistently moist woodland setting, will stay nice and full all year long. A little bit drier, and it'll kind of disappear by the end of the summer. So that's something you got to be a little bit wary of. Wild ginger, great ground cover, great shade garden, low matrix. Alum root, same thing. Nodding wild onion has really nice form throughout the year. A sunny matrix plant can add a little bit of color. Wild petunia. Wild petunia are good mixed in. Wild petunia won't emerge until a little bit later in the year, so that's good to have mixed with other spring wildflowers so that you have something there all year long. And then at the top of your screen, you can see a wild strawberry as well. A really great, and that's more of a ground cover. It can also be that base matrix. And it kind of depends on all the layers in your planting. If you want a really low profile garden, wild strawberry can be a good bet for a ground cover. Mountain mint here just has really good full foliage for a majority of the year. Good matrix plant. An orange coneflower. So this is a much showier plant, but orange coneflower, Rebecca fulgida, not black-eyed Susan, not Rebecca hirta. But this is more of a long-lived Rebecca with large basal leaves, and so this fills out all the way to the ground. And that's the idea. So it can be a little bit taller as long as it fills out to the ground and it occupies that entire space. It can be a matrix plant or just a base layer plant without anything below it. So then we get into the next layer, the mass and focal layer. So these are the things that are going to kind of be emerging up from the matrix plant. So these, and you know, you can have, this shows 3 layers. You can have as many layers as you want. You know, 3 or 4, especially when you start to incorporate shrubs and trees. Or you can just have 2. You can have a perfectly fine garden, especially on the smaller scale, with just 2 layers of the matrix and then the mass and focal layer. So focal plants, they have key interest in the garden. Typically, these are going to be a lot of your flowering species. So you want to make sure you have flowering species throughout the entire year, throughout all seasons. Strong visual interest. And the groupings kind of, it depends on your garden, but you know, 5 to 9 creates a strong kind of identity with each of those going throughout the garden. And I just included mountain mint again because this can occupy, you know, both of those layers. It can be 1 and 2 at the same time, as long as it fills out all the way to the base plant. Orange coneflower as well in the 4th. Columbine is a great one. Columbine will self-seed. It could be a 1 and a 2, but Columbine also sometimes will sort of wither later in the season. So it's good to have it planted in a matrix that can help support that garden the year round. And hummingbirds love Columbine. Golden Alexander. I'll just sort of flip through these quite quickly. Cinnamon fern. Cinnamon fern can be a 1 and a 2 as well, due to how much it fills out. You're not going to get a lot growing underneath there. And so when that gets nice and happy, it'll dominate the surrounding space. Monarda, bee balm. You know, Monarda can be quite aggressive, but it also gets quite thin later in the year when it starts to senesce. So having that in a nice grass matrix is a really good aesthetic that keeps the garden looking full all year long. Penstemon digitalis, actually one of my favorite plants. But if you just had a clump of that planted 1 foot, 10 inches on center, you'd have weed problems because in and around those plants, there's just voids. So that really speaks to the need to plant these in a matrix below it. It just helps to support these plants. And it doesn't mean you need, you know, less of them by any means. You can still have the same amount there. Just make sure they're intermingled with a nice base layer. And that's especially true of rough blazing star. I mean, that doesn't have much of a footprint. It's just a stalk, but it's incredible. It's very pretty, and the matrix plants also help to support some of these taller species. And their root competition will encourage them to grow up versus wherever. If there's not enough competition around the plant, they could get floppy and tend to get really lean. Pale purple coneflower, same thing. Great vertical accent, but needs to be planted in a matrix. Butterfly weed. This is more of a low profile plant. One of the milkweeds. Very pretty orange flowers, but this one also emerges very late in the year. I mean, not until June a lot of times, and mid-June for when it's flowering. So having that planted in other plants that can have that visual mass, you know, you won't be standing over your garden just being like, oh my gosh, what was here, what died, only to be like, no, I'm just not going to come up like that. Common milkweed, same thing, great plant. Aggressive, butterfly weed, not aggressive, but.
What would you explain? I mean, I have a patch of milkweed.
Yep.
Nothing ever eats those flowers.
Okay, so for those online, we just had a question. It said nothing ever eats the leaves of the milkweed.
Yeah.
Where do you get your milkweed from?
It's just growing wild.
Growing wild?
Yeah.
Well, how much of it do you have? I mean, I would say you just plant more. If you plant it, they will come.
I have a patch that's probably 4 foot by 4 foot.
Okay. So the question was, doesn't seem to be anything that's eating their milkweed. And so it could be a variety of things. Sometimes in an environment where maybe there's a lot of spraying and things happening adjacent to your property, you know, from your neighbors or whatnot, that could be potentially impacting caterpillars, you know, killing them and things like that. I asked where you got them from because sometimes in certain nurseries, plants are treated with neonicotinoids, which basically kills things that eat them.
I think they came just from by seed.
Probably, if it's common milkweed, very, very likely, because they will spread and grow wherever. That's why some people think they're weedy. I mean, they're just aggressive. I can't tell you why they're not eating it. I've seen milkweed pop up in a random place that never had it before, and you go out there and there's monarch caterpillars on it. So all I can say is don't be discouraged, and maybe just, you know, and they can be kind of tricky. They'll hide on the other underside of the leaves and things like that. I would just say keep at it, and maybe just check and see if the neighbors are really chemical happy with lawn treatments or things like that. That could always have an impact on insects. Okay, so Rattlesnake Master, this is a super cool plant that I don't think you would think is native, but it is. Very nice accent. Lupin, a very pretty early summer, late spring flowering plant that definitely has quite the appearance, and then senesces later in the year. So having that in a matrix helps to support the garden all year long. And then the next layer above, I just call this kind of the architectural plants. So these are where you're going to have more of your really dominant focal plants in the garden, if you have them. They can also be in layer 2. So this is just showing, you know, can be trees, shrubs, sturdy perennials. It's really kind of what's going to really draw the eye in the garden during certain times of the year. Purple coneflower, a very sturdy, resilient plant all year long. So this could be considered in that group. You know, stiff goldenrod, a little bit taller, and has a nice vertical accent in the garden. Rosinweed, and the list goes on and on. These are just some examples, and so I kept that one pretty short because I could be up here for an hour just clicking through good plants. But so now you kind of have a little bit of understanding about how to structure your garden. You've got your plant palette, so things you can use, and then you understand a little bit, okay, what ones do I want to have for my base layer? What ones do I want to have for some of my other focal plantings? And so then there are kind of different styles you can play with. You know, block planting has very defined blocks of repeating groups of the same plant or the same mixes of plants. So block planting, you just need to make sure that all those plants generally occupy the 1 and the 2, or just the 1, or are planted, you know, being accompanied by a matrix planting. So for example, you could have lots of mountain mint, and then orange coneflower and purple coneflower. All of those generally occupy a pretty decent footprint. And then if you wanted pale purple coneflower, something that needs that base, then you would have an area where you would just have the coneflower.
You're doing so well.
I know. That have the coneflower in just one grass, like little blue stem or prairie dropseed or something like that. The matrix planting is a little bit more free form. You know, that looks pretty wild, I generally do a combination of the two. I like matrix planting because I really like the natural aesthetic, and I feel like that lends itself a little bit better than block planting. Like I mentioned before, I think that's another appeal with Dole, so that's really to kind of help demonstrate the visual style, but those don't have a lot of native species in there.
So one comment I guess we had was block planting makes it also simple when you have to go out and weed.
It does, yeah, it definitely. Yeah,
all the difference there.
Yeah, we just got a comment that block planting makes it easier to weed, and I mean it does generally. If you remember where those different blocks are, certainly. You know, weeding it's kind of, that's where it comes back to personal preference. I think there are a lot of different ways that, you know, you can accomplish this. You know, over time, block planting, and depending on what you put in there, if you've got a lot of well-behaved, quote unquote, plants that won't want to do this and that, then that'll work very well. Sometimes block planting, if you have things that want to just constantly mix, that's where it becomes a lot of personal preference in terms of, am I okay with that? Or do you want it to be staying as you planted it? But I mean, I think that's a really good point. A lot of times that'll be easier for people saying, okay, this is orange coneflower. Okay, and then so matrix planting, this is just showing a little bit of a visual representation of, okay, you've got the dots, which are the matrix plants, and then you've got the different clumps of perennials repeated throughout there for repetition and harmony. And then this shows you a lot more what the block planting are. So one plant or a combination of two plants, and then, you know, smaller blocks throughout for the different architectural plants throughout there to tie the composition together. This is from the No Maintenance, and it's KNOW, not NO. Maintenance Perennial Garden. Roy did his book, and these types of diagrams I think are a lot easier to swallow for many people, just because, okay, you know, this group of these goes here, and it just simplifies it a little bit, because I think some of those other, you know, drawings can just be so like, what a, you know, I'm not trying to create a piece of art here, I just want to know where to plant my plants. So there are a lot of resources like these out there that can help show you how similar gardens are designed, and then you can apply your palette and your desire for your garden to that. So when planting your garden, 4 seasons of interest, try to have something for multiple things blooming throughout the year, so you have overlap, so there's always something happening in the garden. But don't just get fixated on the blooms. Really focus on the structure of the plant as well. You know, what are these species going to look like in November? What are they going to look like in March? What are they going to look like, you know, even you know, right after their petals drop and things like that? What colors do they generate? When I first got into native plants, I was really amazed at how many different colors certain species turn in the fall. I just thought that was for the trees, and I was like, oh wow, the perennials do it too. So you know, those things can really help enrich your garden and give you something to enjoy throughout the year, whatever it's keeping me on track. And then so 4 seasons of interest. So many of the traditional landscaping methodology is, okay, it's the winter's about here, let's just go hack it all down, and then you've got what look like these upside down broomsticks sticking out of the ground, and there's just nothing there. 4 seasons of interest, I mean, the beauty that a winter landscape can have, it's just incredible. I'm probably over time anyway. So then understanding how individual plants behave, this is just a little bit more, you know, of your own education, and, you know, just like we just talked about, what are the other characteristics that they have? What is their form after they bloom? Do they have a strong, you know, visual mass, or are they kind of airy? Are they going to want to spread? What's their root structure like? You know, black-eyed Susans are biennial. So if you plant, like Rebecca heard of, so if you plant a black-eyed Susan in your garden, and then you put down 4 or 5 inches of mulch, that plant is going to be gone in 2 years because it needs to set seed in order to spread. Yeah, if it has the opportunity, right? So knowing those different things can help it, so that when you plant your garden, it's going to be able to evolve and grow as you want it to. So design example. So just to go over what we just reviewed in the layers. So here's just a really quick example garden plan. So kept it simple, 100 square feet, 10 by 10, full sun, sandy loam, dry medium soils, 2% cross slope, so flat. So just nice and easy, full sun. There's nothing complicated about this design, but I wanted to kind of demonstrate this to you. So 10 feet by 10 feet. This grid is each square in there is 1 square foot. So generally, we want about 1 plant per square foot. So 10 by 10, that's 100 plants in this garden. And that's one of the big things when I do see people at plant sales, they're just so excited, and I see them, oh, I can't wait to get these native plants in, and they've got like 5 plants. And I'm like, you're doing so good. Just buy 10 more of each of them. And I'm like, no, but because that's the thing, they want to grow together. They want to be planted close. It just has so many benefits in terms of their structure and their form of the garden. So anyway, about 1 per square foot. Some can be spaced out more. Some should be tighter. And those are things that you'll be able to learn when you learn about the plant palette you develop. All right, so the base layer. So here I just went with 2 of my favorite grasses, prairie dropseed and little blue stem. In this imaginary design example, the front of the garden is going to be the top. Prairie dropseed is a little bit more low profile, so I'm going to have that in the front edge of the garden. Little blue stem is a little bit taller, so I'm going to have that in the back. These don't necessarily mean 1 plant for each X or 1 plant for each circle. It's just kind of showing to myself, okay, this is where these are going to go. And then I'm going to have them mingle a little bit so it's not a straight line and start and stop. Then I'm going for my second layer. So lupin, butterfly weed, and landscape coreopsis, all really nice, kind of short in stature, full sun prairie plants. So saying, okay, I want a group here, show where your different groupings are, sort of keeping them a little bit towards the perimeter just because they're a little bit lower. And so then my next layer, I can come in with a little bit taller plants, but just sort of, you want to repeat plants. You don't want to plant things in straight lines. You want it to look natural. So here we've kind of said, okay, I want to have my lupin up front because they're a little bit shorter, butterfly weed on the edges, and coreopsis more in the little blue stem area because they're a pretty robust plant. Then my, oh, okay, got a question.
Yeah, how many would you plant in those blocks that you put in there too? Are you talking about 5 to 10 plants in a block like that, or just like 1 or 2?
Okay, so the question was, how many plants would we plant in those blocks? And so here I've got it called out for the ones on the edge, and that's just typical for all of them. So based on the square footage, I have 3 lupin per spot, 3 coreopsis per spot, and 3 butterfly weed per spot. But that's just to get it to fit within my 100 square feet. I'd really like to plant more, like 5 or 6. And it depends on the space that you have to work with. And I'll touch on that a little bit when we get to the plant quantities too, because it's just, this is kind of the process. You get to the end of the design, and then you look at what you have and say, okay, what adjustments do I need to make? And just to go back to your question again about the plant quantities, 3 per spot is plenty for coreopsis. That's a very robust perennial. Lupin and butterfly weed, you could get away with planting both of those a little bit closer than 1 foot on center. And so you could have that same footprint and bump those up a little bit if you wanted to. Okay, so then going to layer 3, my architectural plants. So you'll notice that in the presentation earlier, rough blazing star, which are the purple circles, and pale purple coneflower, which is kind of the slash pink drift here. Both of those were in layer 2 before. Well, based on this garden, this is a little bit lower profile. It's only 10 by 10, so I don't want this thing to be huge. So actually some plants that I mentioned in layer 2 before, I'm putting to layer 3 because it's all relative to the other plants that you have in your landscape. So a nice drift of pale purple coneflower going through there, and then a couple clusters of rough blazing star.
Like 16, is that what you had down there?
I have 15 plants for the pale purple coneflower. That's one that's very, straight and narrow, generally a very small footprint. So I plant those things if I want to, 6 inches on center sometimes, just to make, get the density that
I
I want.
remember that you had how many grasses that you used.
I didn't yet, just because I figured that out. In terms of plant numbers. Yep. So, okay, and something we didn't talk about before is scatter plants. So scatter plants are generally, maybe they don't fit right in with your initial assessment, but there's something to add a little bit of whimsy. If you want to add something in there to round out a little bit of seasonal color, I use asters as my scatter plants a lot. So those blue X's are just one sky blue aster, 1 to 2 per location to add a really nice fall display in there, and to just add a little bit of natural character to the garden. So then getting to plant quantity. So basically going backwards, then we want 100 plants in general. That's kind of my goal for this garden space. I typically have a range that I want to try to hit, anywhere from 70% flowering species to 30% more grass-like species to the inverse. It really depends on what you want. Some people place a big premium on a lot of flowering things, and they'll have 70% flowering and 30% grasses. Some people will have the opposite. I really like a lot of grasses in mine, so I went with like a 55-45 mix. And so then just adding up the different plant blocks that we had from before, I got all of my the quantities for my flowering species, and then of that I had 55 square feet left. So I went with 30 little blue stem, 25 prairie drop seed. Now I got to the end, and that's where I was, and I left it like this because that's the discussion I want to have. Is looking at this, I would say, I want some more flowering stuff in there than that. I would pare back on the grass numbers, probably 5 respectively, and just add a few more into the flowering plant quantities at my discretion. So that's just some of the tweaks that you can make along the way. How am I doing on time?
It is 7:24.
Okay, so gotta pick it up. So I've never run into this problem before. Just kidding.
We did have a little technical intervention,
No.
so you get.
We did slow you down a smidge.
I'm just fine. So, okay, then implementation. So, plant ordering. So, native plant producers generally produce plants in what you'll see here, flats. So, the way you can plant a lot more plant per square foot is by buying them smaller. You don't really want to be buying, a bunch of gallons and planting 1 foot on center. That would be very expensive, and it's just harder to dig generally. So smaller plants are a great way to do this at a pace that you can afford. Like we like ordering in small sizes, assume 12 feet on center. There are a lot of, you guys will have this PowerPoint, conservation districts, wild type nursery, hidden savanna, growers from the Native Plant Guild, Cardinal, Prairie Moon. I mean, there's a lot of nurseries out there. And just rule of thumb, start as close as you can at home and get whatever you can as close to your site. And then you can branch out from there. And if you've got to go too far, I mean, we don't go any farther than like the Great Lakes basin generally to get plant material. And so if something's just not available, have substitutions that you're able to swap out with. Have a list of backup plants. That's really helpful. All right, site preparation. So I know we're low on time, so I won't go too much into this, but site preparation is critical when we want to talk about maintenance. It begins with site prep. Weeds are going to be your number1 enemy while your native garden is establishing. So getting that area as weed-free as possible is critical for the long-term success, and to make years 1 and 2 for your weeding efforts much more manageable. So there's site preparation methods, herbicide. So a lot of people time to get to this slide and half the room says, I'm out of here. And I understand that. if you do end up using herbicide for your projects, you just got to make sure that it's done by a licensed herbicide applicator who knows how to safely apply a non-persistent herbicide that is only going to kill, the target weeds in your garden and make room for the good native plants that you want to install. Mechanical, so cultivating just takes more time, but you can cultivate the land over a whole season to get rid of, to prep your site for native plant installation. Sod cutting, if you're able to, if you cut the sod right out, you can plant it right away. So sod cutting is a good option if you have a relatively weed-free turf grass. Solarization, a lot of people do this method because they can do it on their own and it's relatively cheap. It works, it's just sometimes, people have realized that solarization can tend to kind of bake the soil and kill a lot of the beneficial soil microbes. So something you want to look into for all the pros and cons before you do that. Smothering with cardboard and more breathable materials might be a better approach. So smothering with cardboard and then compost. Just know that you can't smother everything. If you go and try to smother a thistle or something like that, it's just going to laugh as soon as you take that stuff off. It's come back with a vengeance. So, depending on what you've got and you're trying to prep, will make a difference in your approach. Okay, so installation. Finally, it's the fun stuff. So layout, if you have a bigger project, this was at the Blanford Nature Center on the west side of Grand Rapids. So we had a lot of volunteers, so we went out, we got a bunch of different landscape paint, we marked out the different areas that we were going to install. You'll have your plan, and then you'll have what you do in the field. And those two things, they have a relationship, but they're not the same. It's never a carbon copy. And we try to, and it's just not, because you say, yeah, I want a few more of these here, or I want some more of these here. Just, there's factors that will make, there's a massage of everything in the field, but however works for you, you don't need to do this, but just, lay out your project and even just laying the plants out ahead of time if you have them in small containers can kind of show you the space versus, just starting to plant and then getting halfway done and like, oops, I'm out of plants. One thing that's great about plugs or smaller pots and containers is that instead of planting them all just with a trowel, you get you drill the holes, and that saves an amazing amount of time. And you do that with a tool like this. I like the long drill bit augers. Try not to get the bulb planters; they're a little bit too wide. But that's better than still just using a trowel. And the longer ones are nice too, because you can get a lot of good leverage on there, especially if you've got a little bit of heavy soil. And then plant. Sounds easy enough. You stick it in the hole. We want the plug flush with the soil surface, and then push in from the sides to really snug that plant in there, and then give it a little tug on the top. If it bounces a little bit, you want to get that in there a little bit tighter, because if you allow them to, squirrels will come and they'll start popping them all out. So when you plant your plug, you want to say, okay, could a squirrel pull this out? If the answer is yes, you got to snug that in there a little bit tighter. And then mulch. So mulch can happen before or after the plantings. If you get your site prepped and you're not going to get your plants for a month, then go ahead and put the mulch down, because that will suppress weeds. Because if you wait a month, all of a sudden you look like, oh my gosh, I got to start all over again. You can do it after too, especially if your planting is tighter, because sometimes that'll help you get the proper spacing. You just want to make sure you only have it 2 to 3 inches thick. You want to make sure you have it enough to suppress weeds, because that is going to be the biggest contributor to suppressing weeds. And you want to make sure that the mulch you get is a kind of, a lot of times they'll call it an annual mulch, but it's going to be a fine shredded hardwood mulch that is going to break down after a couple seasons. Because this isn't an annual thing anymore. This is one and done if we do it right, because the plants need to spread and need to fill out, and too much mulch just inhibits their growth. So none of the chunky black and red mulch, gone are the days. Watering. So watering is really important when your plants first go in, when they're just little babies, but it's going to quickly taper off, as they start to mature and put down those classic deep roots. Even a mature planting, if we get a drought in the middle July, you know, they'll appreciate a drink, but they're not going to require watering like traditional landscape plants do. Okay, and maintenance. You know, I know the title of this lecture said maintenance, and you're probably maybe expecting me to say something profound, but it's not rocket science. It's weeding. You know, one of the things that we get a lot of is, you know, people put in their native garden and then they think, boom, I'm done. Weeding in the first 2 years is really important. A native landscape that is weeded properly and taken care of in the beginning of the project does become incredibly low maintenance over time. You'll always have a little bit of spot weeding and things like that to do, but if your garden is allowed to fill out and you eliminate the competition ahead of time, it makes a huge difference. But there is going to be some weeding. And then know how your plants will spread is a big important part of maintenance. And it comes to personal preference as well. I mean, a lot of plants spread via rhizome. You know, meaning they've got roots that'll go out and they will spread that way. So if you plant a patch, you know, that'll be something during your design phase that you'll know, okay, this plant is going to want to kind of spread and move around. Now, as the gardener, you need to say, okay, am I okay with this plant doing that? Is that what I want? I mean, a lot of times, if you plant a rhizomatous plant, I don't know if I said that right, but if you plant one, that's kind of your goal, but you also want to kind of keep that plant in check if it is starting to creep a little bit too far. Or you have a plant that has a fibrous root system, and you say, I want this to stay here, my plant's mature, I know it's right there, so you can come in and sort of take the hoe around it in the spring just to get any other seedlings and things like that that are getting in there. Do you want your garden to kind of arrange itself a little bit, or do you want to keep it more in check? That's a personal preference. When I do talk about the hoe, this is kind of, I don't know, a push hoe, Dutch push hoe, sometimes they're called, but we like the kind that can be pushed and pulled just under the surface of the soil versus the ones that kind of have more of the claw that you rake and take up the soil. This will kind of slice right under your mulch layer or just the lower or the upper portion of the soil profile and kind of scalp weeds and things like that that you don't want in there. Even certain natives that they're starting to spread anyway, like, oh, I don't want these creeping into this bunch I've got over here. But that's one of the least invasive ways to get in there and do weed maintenance. Okay, fall cleanup. Don't do it. So the old vegetation, in addition to adding beauty, I mean, the colors of, you know, the little blue stem and some of the summer grasses that really persist throughout the winter. Little blue stem stays up all year long. It's snowed on, it bounces right back. Same with switchgrass and a lot of other native species. But they also, in addition to adding interest to the landscape and reminding you of the summer, they also provide a lot of habitat for wildlife, overwintering insects in the hollow pits of the stems, and also cover for birds, food for birds that come and pick at the seed heads. And so then be a lazy gardener. So wait until the spring. And you know, generally the rule of thumb is until temperatures kind of consistently in the 50s. And even with old stems, you know, don't scalp them right down to the ground. Leave them standing up 18 inches or so. And it depends on the garden that you want to have. It depends on the visibility. A lot of times when your garden is mature, what we do at our house is, you know, around this time of year, I'll come through if I feel like it. I don't always. I'll come through and cut the stems off and then just kind of tuck them in the open areas around the plant. That becomes you know, nature's mulch. That's what the plants naturally do. They drop their old vegetation and nutrients back to the soil. That's another way that plants sort of help to spread themselves around. So if you have an area and you're like, come on, you know, fill out, well, dropping some of those plants in those areas will help. If you have a highly visible area or that's just too extreme for you, you know, you can cut these and sort of bundle them up and put them in a protected location as well, just so if there are other insects that are in there, they can emerge, you know, undisturbed as the warmer temperatures come on.
Do you have to ever fertilize these gardens?
No. Do you have to ever fertilize these gardens? No, you do not. So that's another thing in terms of the maintenance. No fertilizing. A lot of people ask as well, Okay, I've got clay. How do I amend it? You do not need to amend it. There are plenty of native plants that do really well in clay, dry clay, wet clay, all sorts of different soil types. So the idea is fitting the plant to your site, not bending your site to make it fit with the plants that you want. And a lot of times native plants, they like a leaner soil. So if you add fertilizer and other additives like that, it'll encourage quick kind of weak growth. A lot of times the plants will be shorter lived as well. So yeah, no fertilizer. So
I have one other question. You talked about cutting that stuff down in the spring and just kind of spreading it around, but as gardeners, we're always told that we shouldn't have a messy floor bed because it only promotes disease for your plants then. So I find those two statements kind of conflicting. Yeah,
so the question was, for cutting plants down and leaving them, I'm like looking at this like someone sees. The question is, if cutting our plants down and leaving them around the vegetation, will that promote disease? And all I can say is you've got to just mimic nature, and the healthiest ecosystems, that's how they operate. And some of those paradigms for traditional landscaping just really fly in the face of native landscaping, and they just are counter to what actually happens. And in traditional landscaping, that very well, may be an issue in certain instances. But for native plants and native landscapes, dropping the clippings around your plants is going to help suppress weeds, and it's also just going to keep adding nutrients back into the soil naturally. So no, that's not one of the concerns that I have at all in terms of that. Now, when I did say, and that reminds me, as in terms of being a messy gardener, something you need to watch in the beginning is leaf buildup. So you can, even in new garden plantings, you can let your leaves fall. But if they're right below or adjacent to a sugar maple or something with a lot of big heavy leaves, make sure that you don't let 5 or 6 inches pile up across the garden, because that will smother new plantings. But an inch or 2 is fine, and then come around in the spring and sort of disturb it a little bit and make sure that nothing got additionally covered up over the winter. But yeah, that organic matter is really important to the landscape. And leaf litter, it's what a lot of, even leaf litter, not necessarily the stems of old plants, is what a lot of insects overwinter. And so fireflies, for example, their larvae are just in the leaf litter. So when you see people blowing their leaves and bagging up and taking them in the trash, that's last year's or the next year's firefly population just bagged up to the dump. And fireflies, another thing like the monarch, it's kind of a flashy example of an insect that we love, but there's so many that we maybe don't hold as high of regard, which also need us to plant their host plants as well. So this is something that might be useful to you in your garden. Sometimes you plant something and you're like, man, I don't know what I did. Maybe I planted the wrong thing or whatnot, but it's just too big for my space. For plants, flowering plants, grasses grow all the time, so you can shear those whenever you need to. But for flowering plants that are mid to late summer to the fall, you can kind of pinch those back if you're familiar early in the season, and that'll just promote a more compact, kind of bushier appearance for the plant. As long as you do that early enough in the season where it has time to rebound and still put out its flowering growth, then you won't be losing any blooms. That's what we did with that aster there, and it just went bananas that year. Then additional planting, that's going to be something that's a part of your maintenance as well. And it's just a fact. Some things will do well and thrive, and some things just won't make it for whatever reason. And that's why I love planting small plants instead of a gallon that cost me $25 and it dies, and you're like, no. You can replace things, and sometimes you just got to say, okay, I don't know why, but this plant loves it here, so I'm going to plant more of that. Or that's a little bit of the maintenance too. So when you do your installation, just know that you're going to have to monitor it, and if it needs a little bit more planting, you know, down the line, you know, that's going to be a part of it to make sure that it's just full and thriving over time and for the long term. So just final thoughts, you know, what you can do is create a native garden. I'm so happy that everybody is here. It's just the enthusiasm that we see around native landscapes is just, it's really growing. And that's just fantastic to see. I just always say that it's a trend that's here to stay. You know, it's just because that's what our planet needs, and I think people are really waking up to that. So it's not that complicated in general. It can seem a little bit daunting, but just have fun with it. Experiment. Don't be hard on yourself, and just know that at the end of the day, you're doing this, you know, for yourself, but really for the planet. So it's just anything you can do is a massive step in the right direction. But then I just have a few pics from some just nice pictures that we can enjoy here in the next couple months, hopefully. Warm up finally.
Are those all for your house?
No. These are some clients' projects. Calvin has a big at their ecosystem reserve. These are some pictures from that. They do a really good job of maintaining it. That's every garden designer's dream, is to have a dedicated team of maintenance staff that take care of it so that it looks good forever. So if you're in the area in the summertime, you should go check that project out at the Bunker Center at Calvin University.
What are the thoughts about pests like slugs and molds?
Yeah.
So what are the, okay, so now it is question time. What are the thoughts about pests like slugs and molds? If you have a garden where maybe in you know 10-foot by 5-foot space and you have 15 plants in there, you're really going to notice when stuff starts to eat it. If you have 75 plants in there, I mean, you don't notice so much. And molds can eat roots and things like that. We have some in our landscape, I'll notice every year, oh, there's a little hole here, a hole there. By midsummer, that's why you plant things so full, because you just don't see that. Some people have problems with slugs. I've never had a problem with slugs. I don't know why. Well, people tell me that.
You must not plant hostas.
Yeah.
I don't. Yeah. I don't plant hostas. They still try to pop up every once in a while from the person who you know used to want but yeah, yes.
What about aphids? You touched on that before. Horrible aphids on the butterfly leaf. You just leave them be or try to get rid of them?
Yeah. So that was a question about aphids. I'm still alive.
Yep.
The question about aphids, what to do about them on milkweed, butterfly leaf. Yeah, I know it can be really worrying when you see that. And, oh my gosh, there are all these aphids or whatnot on there. And the more native plants that you have, the more of the predators that will come. So they will be preyed upon, and they really actually don't hurt the milkweed themselves. I mean, they're an insect that uses that for their life cycle, and things eat them. So, you know, native bugs are good, even if they're the ones that we kind of look at as being, you know, more of a nuisance species. But yeah, I think that is one of the hard things is people, everyone, but like, you know, oh, I've got this plant. They just love it so much, and it's almost like you got to plant them, you got to give them the water and things they need, but then you just got to let them, you know, do their thing, and that's the best thing for those species. And then, in addition to your milkweed, I would plant other native species that are going to attract native wasps. They're going to attract other things. They're going to prey on them. And I know people hear wasps too, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, no, thank you." It's incredible. I have 2 small kids. I have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, and our backyard is just dripping with bees and wasps and things like that. And I am not worried. I mean, I can, through our stiff goldenrod, I mean, there's 100 bees, bumblebees on it once. I mean, you can wave your hand right through it. They are not interested in you. Sorry, I know that was a tangent, but as soon as I said wasp, I know I just said, don't be afraid. You're gonna love them.
Can I mention one thing just to add? I've known Wes for a long time. He's way more refined than I am. I just have 4 acres of natives that do whatever they want to. It's prairie. But for people who are getting started, I recently found that too, the National Wildlife Federation has a native plant finder, and you type in your zip code because a lot of people who want to start, they're like, I don't even know what's native, you know, for me. And it's telling me, it kind of touts, and I think that if you type in your zip code, it actually tells you which plants support the most butterfly species. So it's really helpful, you know, if you like, because all native plants aren't really created equal. They're all good, but like that oak, the white oak example you gave, where there's just hundreds of species, that's like the best tree you can plant if you're only going to plant one tree. So that's a resource. And Ottawa, yeah, National Wildlife, it's called a Native Plant Finder.
Okay, it's the National Wildlife Federation.
Audubon has one too.
Okay, Audubon and the National Wildlife Federation. Okay, the Native Plant Finder. That just comment that is. Keep looking at it.
You can turn the camera on now, and then there will be good. Then
great. No. That's a resource that you can type in your zip code and get a whole list of native plant species native to you. So, which is incredible. And because that can be a big problem is, okay, I want to do it, but then, you know, it's just even how much information there is, sussing out the right information can be very difficult. So,
I think it was just last month, the National Wildlife Federation, their magazine that comes out. I'm a member of it. You might be able to find it at the library. The entire issue was all on natives, I believe. And it covered a little bit more flowers and the 3 most important plants we can plant.
That's
trees
great.
And shrubs and stuff. Very interesting.
What is that? Yeah, that's it.
I shared it for you.
Awesome. Yeah. So you can see on the screen there that is an incredible resource, you know, to help you find your way on this journey. So that's great.
If you're trying to get rid of non-native things that you have in your garden, what's like the protocol, like frequency, like you take one out and put a new one in, you know?
It kind of depends on what you're trying to get rid of. You mean if you've got a native garden already and you're trying?
No, there's like non-native things in.
Oh, so you're just trying to kind of replace over time. Okay, so sorry. The question is, you know, how do you go about starting to replace non-natives in your garden? Oh, great. So our philosophy has always been, you know, 25% is better than 0, 50 is better than 25, and so on. So, you know, starting where you are, you don't need to say, oh, well, I either have to rip everything out and start that way, or, you know, I'm not doing it right. Basically, I would look, you know, start with assessing your site. So soil, you know, light, water, what are the parameters that you have? Look at the plants that would fit that habitat. And then it kind of depends on an existing garden. It might be hard to come do the whole, you know, the matrix and then the different layers. You might just start with plants that have a little bit more structural integrity to them. So some of the ones that tend to have a you know, good structural habit to them and are present throughout a lot of the year. So ones that when they do come up in, you know, the early summer, May or June, you're going to see them until the snow flies. So I would start to replace non-natives with ones that have really good structural integrity if you're going to do it like that. And then if you get to the point where you have, you know, a lot of them replaced, and then you can say, okay, now I can sort of start mingling in a little bit of the matrix in here in the area, start planting grass around those species. I mean, I think that'd be a good way to kind of take it piece by piece over time. Okay, I'll give you next. Yeah, I know you guys.
Yeah, oh, that's okay. So we just took out all of our grass, and we live, I don't know, an 1/8 of a mile to the lake, and the house was built on a sand dune way back in the 50s. So we do love dune grass. Of course, first of all, how do you feel about dune grass? It's not going to be diverse enough if it's just dune grass, and yeah, we're gonna mix in stuff with that.
I love dune grass.
Are there native species that naturally, like milkweed, that naturally intermingle with dune grass? Any advice around like kind of a dune grass garden in the park?
Yeah, definitely. So the question was, what do you do for kind of a dune landscape garden where dune grass tends to be pretty aggressive? That's a situation where I do not mind the aggressive nature of dune grass at all, because stabilizing those sandy soils is paramount. And dune grass does that fabulously. I work with some clients in the west side or along the lake shore, like, I don't want any dune grass. I'm like, why? Because like that's what's here. But there are other resources in terms of looking specifically what species thrive in that kind of dune complex will be helpful. Certain things like butterfly weed can occupy little holes in there. Coreopsis, there are a lot of, it depends on where you are in that that kind of gradient of really close to the lake, very active dune, to a little bit farther back. Because if you're a little bit farther back, there's a lot that you can get. You might need to kind of make sure it doesn't get taken over, and that's where you might want to plant things that maybe are a little bit more robust, that can kind of hold their own in the space. And so that's kind of where I would start, is finding plants that match your space, and then finding ones that are can occupy that niche. But that's a unique landscape for sure.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is our third summer. We took out the majority of our grass and put in natives. So I'm really looking forward to a lot less weeding, because it's been rough.
Yeah.
But it's like I'm still noticing some of it. It's like, okay, I'm obviously haven't gotten all the garlic mustard because it's coming up again. What's the best way to get rid of something like that? And then outside, this may be totally outside of what you do, but just again, invasives in our back, we're on the river, so in our back we have some marsh. The purple loosestrife just appeared this last summer, and it just, I mean, we started manually pulling, but then it's like, oh my gosh, it's everywhere. Yeah. What do we do?
So the question was what to do about persistent weeds, purple loosestrife, garlic mustard. What to do with that? And that is one of the things that can be so frustrating, and one of the things that I think makes people say, forget it, I'll just plant, the plants that can, take the herbicide, I'll just spray it off, because then it's clean. And I know it can be frustrating. For invasive species removal, it's really about that specific species and what it needs to get rid of. I know with garlic mustard, it's pulling it, just like you're doing. And I think those seeds can stay in the seed bank and be viable for 10 years or so. Okay. Yeah, and just try to know that in native landscape gardening, I guess in gardening in general, it's a marathon, not a sprint. If you've got those types of problems, it's frustrating. And I know I have a lot of clients who have waterfront property, and wouldn't it be nice if you could take care of your piece, and then it's good. But as we know, nature doesn't care about property boundaries, and waterways are a way that invasives spread like crazy. Personally, I don't know. Kelly would probably know the best way to treat purple loosestrife. It's probably, I would think most people would probably say attack with herbicide.
Yeah, well, Kalamazoo Nature Center also used to sell, there's a biofilm beetles that eat, although they go in cycles too, so when there's a lot of purple loosestrife, the beetles take over and the purple loosestrife numbers go way down, but then when the plant numbers go down, the beetle numbers go down, and then, so it's kind of this, cycle. But we had no purple loosestrife for the first three years we were there, and then last year it just.
Yeah, so it can be difficult, but it is.
I mean, if you can reach it, they can get an aquatic approved herbicide. You don't go to Home Depot and buy a license or whatever, but if you get an aquatic approved herbicide like before it goes to seed,
We do also house the West Michigan SISMA, which is the Cooperative Invasive Species Management Area. So if you contact the Ottawa Conservation District, we'll put you in touch with our strike team, and they'll be able to connect you with local resources that may provide hand pulling or other types of professional removal services. And they always follow, you know, if it is a situation where chemical is necessary, they follow all rules and regulations. There is nothing over applied in any way. So that would be another resource.
Would be a resource for this possibly frog bed as well.
Frog bed further.
So the Conservation District has resources if you have invasive species issues, and you can reach out to get information about potential treatments and things like that.
So it's just the Ottawa County Conservation?
Ottawa Conservation District. And if you Google that, we're right on Google, we'll come up, our website is there. And you can email us or call us, and we'll get you in touch with the right people.
Now I can talk to you. Okay, I think we got some.
I did have a question come in from Scott. Would you reflect on when I walk into a local nursery and see a proven winner, incredible hydrangea with native on it, how should that be perceived? Black-eyed Susans and coneflowers are on your native species order list. Again, when I walk into my local greenhouse and see several different cultivars of each, how should I navigate that?
Okay, so the question is, you walk into your local nursery, and they've got hydrangeas that are being sold as native. They've got other coneflowers, cultivars being sold as native. So, you know, they're probably saying, which a lot do, that they're native to the United States. Hydrangeas are native further south. And so that's one way that they skirt around that. There's really not, as far as I'm aware, very much regulation in that. So I don't think there's any sort of native police going around directing people. But as we know, it is, you know, from this talk, it's native to your local area. Your county is the best. Your state, you know, is the second best, or I guess your region, as we mentioned before, because Northern Indiana is closer to me than the Sioux. So it's tough. And the thing with, and I don't want to rag on your local nursery because I don't know them, and they could be a native upstart, and I'm totally dinging them, but it's probably not the case. And a lot of times those places use neonicotinoids. So even if it is a native or a native R, maybe a native R that actually does provide pollen and nectar for that's ready for pollinators, it might be treated with a pesticide that kills things that eat it. And so, you know, when we first started our native landscape plant journey, we planted, and it was just a couple coneflowers, I think, and they got eaten up right away. And at first I was like, oh man. And then I was like, oh, the insects out here are starving, and they finally found something they could eat. So that's why you plant a lot of them. So, you know, just back to your question then, you know, though I would be very wary. If you're asking how wary you would be, I would be very wary. And if your intention is to plant native plants, not, you know, for the ecosystem, go to native plant nurseries that get local genotype seed and grow from, you know, wild collected specimens, because that also keeps genetic diversity in those plant communities, which helps make them more resilient to pests and disease. When you get a lot of native plants or plants in the nursery that are all from kind of the same stock or cuttings or things like that, they lose that genetic diversity, which makes them a lot more susceptible to pests and disease. So, we got a couple more questions from the chat.
We had some about the plant sale that got answered. Someone asked, how does Eastern red cedar do in sandy soil?
How does Eastern red cedar do in sandy soil? I don't know. I'd be skeptical. If it has adequate moisture, you'd probably be fine. I think the redbud will do okay in sand as long as it's probably in a location that's somewhat shaded and the soil temperatures are generally cooler. You know, but redbud is one of forest edges and things like that. So I generally like to plant them where
their roots and things are going to be a little bit cooler. So I hesitate to say, oh, they'll be fine in sand without knowing a little bit more about the site.
I've heard that this is the northern limit of the red buds.
Yeah, this is generally at the northern limit of the red-bud range. So who knows, maybe they'll start creeping northward. But I love the planting if I get a good site for it. They're a really great landscape tree. Few disease problems and things. So if you've got a good site for it, red buds are great. Yeah.
That's it over here.
That's it. Any other questions? Okay.
Do you have any recommendations for plants to attract native bees?
Oh man, lots of them. Yeah. I mean, any native plant that flowers. Really, but I don't know. Some of the favorites. Mountain mint. I mean, that is a pollinator magnet. My stiff goldenrod just goes crazy. One of the great ones. So you'll see in the nursery trade a lot is purple coneflower. So there are two different types, and I mentioned the. Did I repeat the question?
You're good. It's okay.
Okay. You're good. So there's two different types of purple coneflowers that I mentioned. There's the pale purple, which is very whimsical, not much of a footprint. Then there's the more traditional purple coneflower or broadleaf purple coneflower. That one is a real pollinator magnet as well. Black-eyed Susans, especially, I like Rebecca fulgida or orange coneflower, but I just typically don't plant Rebecca hirta in a landscape setting just because it is biennial. But a lot of the Rebecca's, I mean, there's really no flowering native perennial that you will plant that isn't going to be a magnet. But some of those ones I mentioned are above and beyond. So
You said mountain mint?
mountain mint, yeah. Mountain mint, a lot of the Rebecca's, like black-eyed Susan.
Yeah, I know. You said something before that.
Stiff goldenrod.
Oh, stiff goldenrod.
Yeah.
The asters and goldenrods too in the fall because everything else is done blooming, but they're just like swarmed with bees.
There. And it's good to plant a variety as well, though, because you want things blooming throughout the year, just like Kelly mentioned. I mean, goldenrods and asters are in the fall, but we need to make sure you've got spring, and summer accounted for it as well.
Another important thing about bees is a lot of them are ground nesting. So the less you disturb your soil, the more bees you'll have. So once you get your native gardens going, people used to turn everything over every year while you're messing with the bees like crazy.
Yeah, we just got a comment that a lot of bees are ground nesting, and so minimally disturbing the soil helps to keep those bee numbers up as well, and keeps them in your garden right. You have a question?
Yes. So I live in a subdivision and I am weeded there because I consistently rip out all of the lovely plants that the lovely people who built the subdivision put in. So how do I balance both so that my neighbors stop being mad at me, but I can still meet my goals as because I want to be pollinator friendly. Like I have a giant vegetable garden in my backyard and my neighbors say that it's weeds every year. And I had to,
vegetable gardens?
yes, my tomato plants in particular, because I grow a lot of indeterminates, so they get real tall. And they're like, well, their whole back garden is filled with weeds. And I was like, see those round things, those are called tomatoes. And like literally I've had to have people, like the HOA board come to my house and like, this is a tomato, this is a cucumber, that like it's ridiculous. So I'm trying to right now my big goal is our front garden is filled with those and I'm like I just want to go home and machete it. But I don't want to make everyone real mad at the same time. So how do I balance both?
Okay, great question. The question was how to balance living in a subdivision where there's a certain standard that is expected and also wanting to support the pollinators in general. And this is one that people struggle with all the time. So there's a couple different things I would suggest. One is, there's this guy named Benjamin Boyd.
Yeah, no, my friends are here.
Oh, I was gonna say, check him out, because you got a kindred spirit. He's a native plant designer out of Nebraska, and he lives in a subdivision that from, property line to property line, it's native plants, and everywhere else is manicured lawns. So I was gonna say, look at him and maybe you'll feel a little bit happier. So, using some of these principles in terms of finding the right plants, and then, it's a little bit about finding native plants, and similar to the other question we had back here, that fill that landscape role. So ones that have a long presence in the garden, maybe ones that you can find at the the local nursery, but are actually you can find the native, straight native varieties of. So there's some people, there's a recognition of, oh, okay, I know what those flowers are. And planting in repeating patterns, block planting would probably be better in your situation because it looks more orderly. So maybe you can't go full bore, okay, matrix all these layers, but you can say, oh, okay, I can get some of these good high quality native plants in the garden and replace that with, HOAs and things like that. It depends. I mean, sometimes people will be understanding, sometimes they're not. So, I mean, that can be a challenge. Education is the only other thing, not the only other thing, but the other main thing that I would suggest. Little signs are also helpful. So you have a little garden sign that says, hey, this is pollinator habitat or what have you. It adds another level of kind of intentionality to your landscape. It shows people that, okay, this isn't just me letting things go and have a party out here. It's like I'm doing this for a reason. And that can even get some of your neighbors talking and interested in it. It's a tough paradigm to break, and especially if you live in a community where you do have to, fall in line or mind the rules in some fashion. Then I know that can be difficult, but yeah, I would try to use native plants that fit within the context of your area, and then just slowly bump them up out. And in 10 years, people will be like, hey, when did that happen?
So I put clover next to my lawn in the front yard, and then I do a wild stuff.
There you go.
And the clover actually seems greener than the lawn because I don't know where the lawn.
Yeah, right. So then the grass.
Like, because I have tons of dandelions, and all of my neighbors are out there, and I'm like, look at my like I'm like rolling around in them, and my kids love them, and I love, my kids bring me like this big piece of, and they're like, oh, if you take care of that, I got some Roundup back here. I'm like, touch my lawn.
It's certifications you can get too, like National Wildlife Federation, you can get certified as a backyard habitat, or you can get certified as a monitored waste station, and actually get a sign.
You just have flags everywhere. Yeah. So you gotta make your certificate. So you can say, look, I'm certified, whatever.
Yeah, that point was just made that you can get your landscape certified as certified pollinator habitat. That reminds me of another thing. Doug Talley with his new book, Nature's Best Hope. He talks about this idea of the homegrown national park, I think is what he calls it. And basically said if everybody, with a combination of lawns that we have out there, if everybody took a portion of their property and built native plants, you could have a national park that I think he said is 20 times bigger than Yellowstone or something along those lines. So, and then you can also, I think there's a nonprofit out there certifying people's landscapes in that regard too. So saying, hey, I did this native installation, and they'll put you on a map. So maybe put them on a map, get yourself on a map, and then say, you can't touch this. We'll over here in a second. We'll put you up on social media. Call this place up for it.
To that reference there, my sister lives in North Carolina, and she lives in a subdivision in a cul-de-sac. Everybody has the grass and barely anything. Over time, she turned her entire front yard, and probably her backyard right now, into native plants and whatnot. She had a bluebird house right by the mailbox, and she got it naturalized with the sign. And over time, the neighbors were noticing the butterflies and the birds, and got to talking to her, and they started like she's been giving them plants, and they're all slowly noticing that if they do a little something, it's more interesting than just that grassy yard.
So for those still on the call, we just had a success story of people transitioning their neighbors over time just through education and kind of showing them.
She took the naturalized horse, and now she's a whatever you call it.
Great.
And she's got her house open to the public, I think May 1st or something. Everybody's gonna come through and look at it, hopefully she'll educate a few more.
That's great, and I think part of it too is just people in general are well-intentioned, but they just can't let go of the idea that they think what they're doing is right. Some people have very manicured gardens that don't do much for wildlife, but telling them that is like you're shattering their whole world. So, I think that education, and when people do see, hey, wow, look at all the butterflies and the bees they have. And then now, I mean, we're at a time when people are realizing how important that is. So people are realizing how much habitat that we're losing. And yes.
I have a couple questions on here, but if it makes you feel better, my neighbors mowed my lawn for me last summer. Thanks for doing that. Yeah, a little conversation about that. I have a few questions that came in. Can you toss out some good plants for shady yards? Good shade plants.
Good plants for shady yards. So there's a lot of okay, so let's start with like the matrix. A lot of sedges are really good for shade. So there are some grasses that are, but if you're looking for a good kind of green, lush landscape, so like Pennsylvania sedge, plantain leaf sedge, ivory sedge, Sprengelly sedge. I mean, there's a lot of them, and there's a ton. So if you go to certain native plant nurseries, there's plenty of times where I need to look up what they're growing that year. So I'm like, I've never heard of that. Let's see if it fits in my landscape. Wild geranium is a great low profile one. Really easy to grow is wild columbine. Wild columbine is great. And when wild columbine is happy, it'll just seed itself like no other. So there are locations where I have columbine that, I don't know, maybe it's in a little bit too sun, maybe it's a little too dry, and the plants do fine, but in certain locations where they're really happy, in the spring I have a ground cover of baby columbine. It's just really incredible. Blue stem goldenrod, that's one plant combination I like to use a lot, is columbine and blue stem goldenrod, because it'll be all columbine, I think that's all it is, and by fall it's all blue stem goldenrod. I don't even know how to do it, but they just switch. So that's really great. One of the really fun things about shade gardens is spring generals. They're a little bit hard to get your hands on, especially native ones, but things like Trillium, Jack in the Pulpit, Virginia bluebells, mayapple. There's quite a few, but I would say Columbine's probably my favorite and easiest, so I go with that one.
Awesome. Right. Any last questions? Otherwise, I think we'll take one more, and then if anybody else has any questions, grab Wes's email so that he can definitely follow up with you on those. But I think we'll take one more and then wrap it up.
And just before you leave, if anyone's interested, I have a flyer for the Academy event in Grand Rapids. I'm a member of the Native Plant Guild, which is this organization of small businesses all focused on native landscaping. So we got our card up here if you guys are interested, and some pamphlets just about some of the stuff that we talked about that I printed off right before the pandemic, and then no one wanted to take anything from that. So wasn't a hang out for a while. So before you leave, if you're interested, that's up there.
So we have this eons of ivy, I suppose it's English ivy. So one thing I wanted to get this year was the last Columbine for the shady area. We also have commercial highway. And I see that in a lot of wooded areas. No, okay. Anyway, if I want to do an area with wild Columbine, should I pull up all that ivy in that area at least?
Yes. Yeah, so the question, yeah. So the question was, got a lot of English ivy and myrtle, you say, which is very common, and you want to plant some columbine, so what should you do? You don't need to rip all the English ivy out, but definitely make a place for it. I mean, yeah, I'd love to rip it out, but I know it's just not feasible for everybody. If you want to get started, yeah, make an area where you can rip it out. The English ivy can be maintained through hand pulling. It can be kept in check. It's not as bad as, I mean, it's bad, but it's not as bad as some of the other, invasive ground covers. And I just want to say, no judgment. I mean, I'm a landscape architect. I learned about some of this stuff after working, with Kelly for a restoration firm out of college. And then I realized, I mean, we weren't taught this at all. So people sometimes would say, well, look good, this stuff, I'm sorry, I didn't know it was bad. Like, that's no problem. You've seen the light, and that's fine. And that's why there's just so much, education these days, but no shame. And I'm proud of it.
So if we clear that area for the Columbine, should we also, because I know leaves will all come up then, that also find an appropriate sedge or something like that to plant with it?
Yeah, that'd be great. Definitely, the English ivy will want, so the question was, should they plant sedges with the Columbine as well? So, Columbine is really great because it will self-seed, but I'll definitely put some sedges as kind of a base layer for it. But just know that ivy is always going to want to come back. So, but I mean, what you could start with is, if you got the time to do that patch right now, go ahead and do that. And then just say, okay, next year I'm going to take the ivy out another 3 feet or whatnot, kind of do it like that. And then make sure you put mulch down too, because when you do pull that ivy out, the mulch will help prevent the ivy creeping out a little bit more. And when it does creep in, it'll kind of be going to mulch first, so it'll be easier to weed out, and it'll just help keep the soil moist for those young plants. So,
thank you.
Okay, well, thank you all very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks everyone who's still on Zoom for hanging on with us.